Hello and welcome to the Stack Magazine's podcast. My name is Stephen Watson and I run Stack, the magazine club that delivers a different independent publication to your door every month. In this episode, I'm speaking with Julia Flaster, founder of Debris, and Cher and John Tjhia. They're editors of the magazine's most recent issue, which we deliver to our subscribers in January this year. Now, we don't normally have our subscription magazines on the podcast because we also have our magazine club where we invite people to a Zoom call to meet the makers of the previous month's magazine. But Debris is based in Australia, and to make timings work, we're recording this early in the morning in the UK, so it's end of the day in Australia. And since most of our subscribers are in the UK and the US and Europe, and no matter how much they enjoyed this magazine, I don't think many people would get out of bed, especially early for it. So I decided to take away the audience and just make this a conversation between the four of us. So Julia, Cher, John, thank you very much for making time to talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for getting up so early.
All right, so I was just talking to all of you before this, and there's so much that I want to know. So we sent this magazine out in January, and as is always the case, I don't know what a magazine is going to be about until it arrives with me. And this magazine arrived with the theme of no. so tell me, where did the idea for no come from?
Well, the last issue of Debris that we had guest edited was themed "The Urge to Know," as in no. And we were just sort of trying to think, well, what kind of comes after that? What comes with knowledge? What sort of action is called? And we sat with it for actually not a very long time before just coming back to this sort of beautiful energy that's tied up in that very simple, very basic word, no. Literary magazines can have very complicated and convoluted sometimes themes, and we just sort of wanted to seize the opportunity to draw into that energy that kind of derives from knowledge that, if you know, you know.
I love it.
Yeah, and then what comes after that? And it's a no. And I think it speaks to a lot of sentiments right now in the world where people are just saying no to a lot of things. And we wanted to explore what that meant for different people.
Because I was struck by how, no is like the most definitively negative word in the English language. And yet you seem to spin a surprisingly kind of positive interpretation of it. When you start with something like no, what was your thinking about where you wanted to end up with it?
I think when we conceptualized this topic, we were thinking about refusal, as I was talking about, before, how it's a kind of time where people have sentiments that might relate to no, but instead of boxing ourselves into its very definitive definition, we decided to expand it a little bit with our prompt, because no could possibly mean yes to something else. And from there, contributors just surprised us, really, and then we just put together this issue that reflects no in its different guises.
In the start of the editor's letter, you kind of define this project of no. So you say no war, no genocide, no corporatism, no big business, no oligarchies, no neo-feudalism, no rapacious plunder of land, no capitulation, no phone, no imperialism, no future. And it gets to the end of that, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm with you in the no camp.
Yeah, I guess in some ways it's sort of tangentially related to this idea of anger as a sort of productive and insightful energy. It's not an angry no necessarily, but when you're sort of faced with things that you refuse to engage with or refuse to become associated with, it imparts a certain energy, and that energy is really powerful and really specific, and it can be very, very productive. And a great clarifying force in what it is that, yeah, indeed, what is it that you'd say yes to, or what would you put your energy into trying?
And then that's the start of the editor's letter, and then the end of the editor's letter, you then sort of like challenge people to find the yes. So you're saying perhaps we can tempt you with one of the many types of no's: an ecstatic no, a vibrant and affirming no, a glorious no, a fantastic opulent no, a redirection of the sinister and dominating as we rip the universe a new one through which a new world might yet be born. Yes, can't you or won't you? Like I love this sort of this idea of going like, okay, so like we've set out the terms for this. Now, what are you prepared to get behind? And John, I think that's basically what you were just saying. Like you're offering people an opportunity to step into something.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of like constantly fed things that we absolutely hate to see and hate to be part of and want to divest from personally and structurally. But it's not enough to just sort of like scroll and look at a screen and say, yeah, that's shit, or I'm not into that. I don't like it. That's bad. Things are bad. We know things are bad. We are very much kind of like interested in the sort of the micro ingenuities and the sort of like necessary inventions of this social context, and like what is it to kind of face the reality that you're facing and to understand those no's but metabolize them into something that is creative and that is actually that can sort of envisage a path forward and that can try to remedy those no's.
Yeah. Instead of seeing no as the end point or a particular blockage, we wanted to expand what the word could mean to different people and how they would engage with it in their writing.
Yeah, yeah. I was interested in you invoking Antonio Gramsci, like with sort of like his old world dying and a new one struggling to be born, and it struck me. I think he was writing like nearly 100 years ago, right? So like sort
It
of
was.
before the Second World War, and we now find ourselves in this very troubled time with lots of very bad things happening in the world. Like what? Like, do you have sort of like an idea of like what a magazine like Debris can be doing now in that broader context? Is there sort of a role for a literary magazine like this to play in terms of like trying to set down what's happening in the world and try to formulate some response to it?
I mean, yes, and I'm just going to jump in, but I think yes and no. Like, I think we've got to be honest with what like a literary magazine can do and what writing can actually do. And it's great that we're writing, but also like writing demands actions, I think. And like we set out ideas, but then you have to kind of like do them in the real world, I think would be my main take. Yeah, what do you guys think about the power? I think the power of like literary magazines, because we can all like often like be very excited about what like the changes that literary magazine can offer, but there are, I think, limitations to the writing itself.
I mean, definitely, but I think there's much power in writing when you read something and it moves you, or it causes certain emotions for you to take it outside of the the reading experience, to perform an action somewhere. But I think in the context of Debris, as while John and I were guest editing it, we were thinking about, how we could foster some kind of, imaginative writing, more experimental writing that we don't normally see in literary magazines as such. I mean, for a tiny one, we wanted to try and open up different possibilities of how writing can be done, whether that's a poem or an essay or a short story. And because it's such a blank type of starting point. Of course, it makes it exciting. So yeah, I think I kind of agree with Julia, but also, yeah, it's a bit of a yes and no kind of answer.
I think I was also add that, like, you know, the role of writing in some ways, like so much of the repetitiveness of certain issues and cycles and power dynamics in the world are tied up in narrative. And, you know, there is this particular space that literature in particular can do, which is, you know, if it's fortunate enough to have the sustained attention and the kind of like a focused enough reader, it can open up ways to question the kind of framing of the world. And it can, at its best, it can be a refusal of the questions that are put to us, you know, a redefining of the terms. But I think for me, what part of the limitations actually inherent to the form of commissioned writing. So I think, like for me, one of the limiting things and not in a way that's like, you know, my omnipotence is like being cramped or something, but there's something about the way that you kind of formulate a proposition through the editorial process or through having a particular thematic or an idea, and yet you know, you kind of you perform this interesting balance where you're inviting people to put forward their ideas, and you're trying to develop their ideas whilst also trying to articulate in some way your expression of that thematic or the way you're trying to sort of like reconcile it with the aims of the publication or the aims of the editor. And so I think that's kind of an interesting tension, and I think it's a very social tension, and I really I think Cher and I talk a lot about praxis and about, you know, lived politics, and you can have all these sort of theories about how that process will work, but there's something very revealing in that negotiation at every step of it.
Yeah.
So then tell me how you go about doing that. So you start from this quite broad theme, I guess. I mean, no can go in so many different directions. Is it in the people who you approach to write for you, or is it in the sort of like the brief that you give them? How do you sort of set people on the right track like that?
Yeah, I think we started with the brief that we disseminated as a pitch call out, because we tend to you know, with the brief tends to be half pitch call out, and then there's a few commissions that we will do independently outside of that, but it focuses on that call out because there's this interest to interact with unpublished first-time writers, emerging writers, writers we've never heard before, and that is what genuinely excites us about this project, instead of, you know, certain you know, well-known writers or writers that are already down the loop. So that was the bulk of what is inside the issue that we are seeing right now. But we also commissioned maybe about how many, 3, 4 out of everything, John.
It's going to have to
And
check.
those commissions worked in the sense of, those commissions worked in the sense of how we thought someone, whether a poet or an essayist or a short story writer, could, whether they embodied that notion or not based on our little brief. And that was why we started with I.O.'s poem, which is a no poem. And he's a bit of a cult figure in the Melbourne literary scene. He's an old Greek poet who's, you know, very effervescent in his readings, and has a bit of an anarchist disposition about him. So we thought to ask him, and he agreed. And so it's about commissioning writers who embody the spirit, and then also looking for new writers or writers we've never worked with before who responded to the brief in a way that made us feel curious or excited.
Yeah, and I think like there's a process of discussing things as well before the writing sort of, I mean, some people come with, a work in progress or even a finished work, especially poets, but there is a process often of discussion and sussing out, what are you interested about this topic? And it's, I think a lot of writers don't have a chance to sort of, and because it is a sort of interesting, often solitary, often egoically sensitive process, there's a sort of like an isolation of that, which isn't always very healthy. And it can be really good when it's not competitive, but it's sort of like you share a mutual aim in discussing things before the work is really undertaken substantively. And so you kind of have a chance to sort of feel out, what is it that you're thinking about this topic? Would you like to start from here rather than starting from here? Knowing what we do about where we want to pitch the magazine in readership and literacy of certain things, and literacy maybe generally as well. And then, of course, you've got your graphic novelists who I think, am I right in saying we've always commissioned the graphic novelists and that they don't tend to pitch?
That's kind of new. It's just started for issue 4. It's a kind of a new thing we've put in place that I like. But yeah, since issue 4, they've always been commissioned. But yeah, it's a newish thing.
So Julia, that's an interesting point. So the magazine started in 2021. Would you say that there's anything else about the magazine, like as a project, that is different now to when it started?
And graphically, I think that would be maybe the most. Maybe we used to do just the most random covers, and we've tried to like install a bit of continuity in between issues since issue 4 actually. So that has changed because I moved back to France where I'm originally from, and I started working with a graphic designer there for issue 4, and we've sort of tried to have some kind of like graphic stability. That has changed, but also we used to do I kind of used to work with different guest editors for each issue, and we would come up with a different theme every time. But then since maybe for the last year and a half, like John and Cher have been working as ongoing editors. I think stability has maybe changed, is something like that I've worked towards. Yeah, just making the magazine more stable, basically. Yeah.
That's interesting. So John and Cher, are you now so you're no longer guest editors, you're now the editors?
Yes.
Part of the furniture.
Well, we currently just wrapped up work on the 7th issue, the one after No, which will end up being a part of a trilogy of issues at this point. So, we have heard of The Urge to Know, and now it's, and then it was No, and now it's Get Help. We just wrapped up work on that, and it's going to be a quite exciting issue, I think, because we were thinking about, what was next after those 2 prompts, and we thought, of solutionism and what that meant, and then came up with that theme, Get Help, which has cultivated a lot of interesting responses.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to see that. So is that going to be, when can we expect to see that?
May 2026.
Very cool. And Julia, I'm interested to hear you say, so with this cover here, you were saying you were pretty sort of abstract and random in the first. I mean, I think we can say that you're not exactly selling out with there are no cover lines here. There's sort of this isn't something that's jumping off the supermarket shelves at me.
But for the first issue, we didn't have the name of the magazine on the magazine, so that's a big improvement. We have the name of the magazine and the name of the writers. Who knows what we'll have for the next issue. I think because I've like never. I didn't used to work in magazines. I didn't know that people were particularly attached to like continuity, but so that's why now we have the name of the magazine on the magazine. No, but it's what I mean by continuity is just like a similar design at least, or like base that you can recognize from one issue to another. I think that's quite nice to have in terms of how recognizable it is. But yeah, no, it's not your. It's still very different from one issue to another, but at least the structure is the same, is what I meant.
And so what is this graphic on the cover? Where did this come from?
It came from a photographer whom we know from one of the contributors who provided the centerpiece, you can say. His name is Poo Guo, and he sent us a few photos that we thought that for consideration, and that particularly struck us because it is just graffiti that's scratched out on a dusty mirror, and there's actually some funny Easter eggs in there if you can read Mandarin. And
Okay.
that tickled me a lot. That tickled me, especially, me and John being Chinese Australians. We thought that would be a bit of a little, in joke as our guest edit issues tend to have become so far. It's a bit of a fun project for the both of us, on top
Okay,
of engaging in great writing.
I hadn't thought of using Google Translate and looking at what all this says, but now I'm going to have to do that and figure out.
I'm also a fan of the sort of quite cute, I will say, sort of poo emojis that are drawn in there as well.
Oh, I didn't even clock that as a poo emoji. Okay.
Well, they sort of look like fruits, and in some ways they are.
One of the things that I really appreciate about this magazine, and it's because I'm on the other side of the world, is this magazine as an Australian magazine. And so, there's a good proportion of the magazine which is giving that particularly Australian view of something, but then there's probably just as much which is work that comes from elsewhere. So do you guys have an Australian kind of identity in mind when you're putting this together, or is it really just comes down to the stuff that is submitted at the start?
I don't think it's definitely not conscious, because I think with Debris, there's this interest to break out of certain parochialism that can be a tendency in Australian, literary circles due to being such a far away and isolated place from the rest of the Anglosphere. But while we were wanting to center certain ideas, such as the essay on voting no at a particular referendum, because that's an important issue in Australia, because for readers in Australia, we also wanted a transnational sort of outlook, because I think in this day and age it would be I don't know, it's a bit silly to preserve a certain identity that is that's a national identity in a world that is, to me, quite borderless in that regard. I think when it comes to art, the more transnational it is, the more interesting it can become.
Yeah, I would say also we have a sort of a questioning relationship with this idea of Australian identity, and try to sort of like Cher was saying about borderlessness, sort of see this place as not just a place of, obviously not a place of one people's, but as a sort of a particular intersection, and that includes an intersection of sensibilities and of sensitivities, and I think that there is a sort of like a fundamental unsettledness to that, or I hope there would be, because that word settledness implies certain things around colonialism that we actively kind of work against or work to unpack. And I think about something that a friend of mine, Gabby Briggs, has said recently, and that keeps coming up in my head, which is to sort of sit in that discomfort, or sit in the uncertainty and unresolvedness, and how important that is. And I think that there is often something really unresolved about the most interesting literature. It sort of holds a space as well for the reader to make sense of the encounter.
So how does that apply then to this project in the longer term? So you guys now you've published 2 of the issues with you editing. You've got another one on the way. Like, what are you looking for in the future? What can we expect to see from Debris like next year, for example?
Yeah, we're going to publish. There's going to be, we kind of like publish issues around the same time in May, and then in December again. I don't know. We haven't talked about the next issue yet. Maybe you guys have been talking about it. What happens
No,
after the
we
trilogy?
haven't, because we've been busy to get help. But
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, I'm personally interested in, after, post trilogy, to sort of think through what it can mean to write experimentally, but also in a way that's as I was talking about before, with the transnational aspect in mind, while being sort of either based in Australia or not. Just thinking through what different types of writing can look like, or different types of writing can look like in this kind of state of polycrisis that everyone in the world is experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of doing that to me is, as well, is like the relationships that inform the kind of writing that we can invite people to undertake with us, and the people that will do that with us. For every issue that comes out, there is often a process of approaching a lot of different people and talking to them about what's possible in the time frame and on the subject matter. And for many, many reasons, often a lot of that remains invisible work because they don't end up publishing a piece. But I think in the long run, that's something that allows us to hopefully work with people to articulate different positions in different ways, to kind of surface trust through those relationships over time. And also, I think to sort of explore what the form of a literary magazine can be. We do also other work in different media, and I think it's always interesting to compare how different media formats kind of align with each other and what their sort of interactions or contradictions are. How I work a lot with access personally, and so transcripts and descriptions and ekphrasis are really big parts of that. And given more time again, I'm very interested in sort of, for example, we commission an artist for every issue, and I'm really interested in the kinds of work we can commission and how that can be represented in a print format. Typically, we work with image-based artists, but not always, or we invite sculptors and other kinds of artists, and they produce something that's image-based. But it would be interesting to think about how, using what we know about text and what we know about other forms, we can bring different things into a magazine that are not maybe traditionally considered easy to do.
Yeah. And I think as the print form is simultaneously facing a state of dwindling, but also seeing a resurgence in interest and, there's more desire while it is a dwindling form. We would like to try and, I guess, unpack that and then see what can be possible in print that can also speak to digital mediums, or how we can integrate those forms, that tension perhaps that John was talking about previously.
Right, because the reality is we all live in this digital world, and I mean, like, I spend basically my whole day looking at a screen and doing stuff. So then the print thing becomes like something separate to that and outside of it, and I guess opens up some opportunities.
Yeah, and what is it what is print spatially, and what is print in a tactile sense? What is it physically to sit and read? Are there different ways to encounter a text other than to like hold it in front of your face and read it left to right? I think these are all questions that obviously you're really curious about as Stack, and we are too.
Love it. Well, look, I've really enjoyed watching you guys from afar for a long time. So I'm so pleased that we've finally managed to actually send the magazine out to our subscribers. And it's so good to talk to you about what you're all doing now. So thank you again. I'm looking forward to seeing that next issue coming out in May.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Steve.
you, Steve. Really grateful, and have really enjoyed watching the London sky light up behind you. Extra pleasure of this media.
Morning is broken. Let's go and do the day.